So, hi everyone. This is just going to be a quick video to show you the basic overview of this engine and turbo setup. So, this is a D14A1, which comes standard with a set of Keihin dual carbs as seen here. So, yep, D14A1, which was pretty common in the UK market, at least. I don't know about anywhere else in the world. The sort of fourth generation saloon slash sedan shaped cars only came in this GL spec in the UK. So they all come with this same 1.4 dual carb engine, unless people have done swaps, of course. In this case, I have fitted a turbo to it, which is probably why you're here. So we've got a standard sort of T3 style cast manifold, and I've actually fitted a GT1752 from a Saab. Turbo doesn't fit the manifold itself due to different stud patterns, so I've got a set of adapter plates made up to help that fit. Intercooler setup is pretty standard as far as these cars are concerned. So sort of rear of the intercooler there, intercooler across the front of the engine bay, back up over here, and some very janky looking dodgy silicon pipes here. What with quarantine and lockdown, it's been pretty hard to get hold of parts, so I just had to make do with what I had, for now at least. Goes through to a homemade plenum made of 75mm, sort of 3-inch box section, very sort of basic, blow valve on top, into probably the most interesting part of this setup, which is the dual carbs. So, not really had to do very much to get these to work, actually. What I'll do is I'll put a bit of a diagram on the screen, sort of about now, and I'll show you the Pitot tube setup that I have made for these carbs, which is basically the only real modification I've made. And what this setup allows is for the air pressure inside of the fuel float bowl to be increased over the venturi pressure, and basically forcing fuel through as the boost pressure increases, sort of without actually having to change either the needle or the main jet itself. I've made some very small sort of spacers to go under the needles to lift them up slightly, which is sort of similar to moving the clip position as you would on a lot of carbs of this style. Basically to richen it up it slightly, although to be honest I'm pretty doubtful it's actually made much difference, because the spacers were made of sort of 0.9mm sheet steel, so they're very small adjustment. So the Pitot tube setup basically takes air pressure from upstream of the plenum, slightly at least. You can see this bolt coming out the side of this tube here, which attaches to a P-clip, which is attached to the pipes that feed into the float bowl vents on the carbs themselves. That is about the only real modification to the carbs themselves. So as the boost pressure increases, the air pressure inside of the float bowls increases as well. To account for this, we've had to add a rising rate fuel pressure regulator. One of these, Malpassi sort of style one. There's a few around on the market. So we need an electric fuel pump in order to provide the sort of required pressure. Typically it's sort of 2 to 3, maybe 4 psi at sort of standard atmospheric pressure, plus whatever your air pressure in the float bowl will be. So say you're running 7 psi, half a bar of boost, you need that plus the small amount, so maybe 10 to 12 psi, a pump capable of that sort of thing. I've just gone for a standard sort of inline electric fuel pump, which is capable of way more pressure than we actually need. So you have to make sure these fuel pressure regulators are a little bit temperamental. You have to make sure that the return line is adequately sort of free flowing. So in this setup, due to the standard factory return line to the tank being 5mm versus the 8mm feed, I've actually teed the return from the regulator back into the pre-pump setup. What I'll do actually is I'll put a diagram on screen to show the sort of schematic of my fuel system, just to basically reduce that return fuel pressure enough that the regulator can cope, because trying to hold sort of 2 or 3 psi at idle and stuff like that is pretty tough with these pumps, with the running flat out, because they want to pump so much sort of flow and pressure. So between that sort of fuel pressure regulator and the pitot tube is pretty much all of the modifications you need to run these carbs with a turbo. At the moment, the car is running sort of 12.5 to 1 on boost. We're running about half a bar, 7 psi boost at the moment. So, yeah, it drops down to about 12.5. Ideally, I'd like it a little bit sort of richer than that, mainly because I'm running the stock distributor as well. So standard sort of 2-wire Dizzy with its sort of vacuum advance, etc. Very sort of basic stuff. Obviously doesn't account for any ignition retard on boost, so I've clocked it back a couple of degrees versus how it ran naturally aspirated. No other ignition changes than that. That's why I'm running at such a low boost. I mean, these engines aren't renowned for being particularly robust, not the 1.4s at least. The 1.6s, on the other hand, are sort of pretty capable engines, upwards of 200 horsepower, 250 horsepower or so on stock internals, whereas these 1.4s, quite small rods, quite small big ends, etc. So probably won't cope with too much power. But given the minimal amount of changes I've had to make, I feel like the setup's pretty good. The long-term plan will be to swap in a 1.6 if this engine lets go, and then I can swap one straight in, same manifold, same intake, same everything, and it should sort of not require too many changes. Could even swap to injection in the long term, but that is quite a bit more of an involved job, because that would involve sort of swapping out looms and things, all that sort of jazz. So that will probably do it for this video. I might do a few more videos in the future, maybe going a little bit more in depth into what I've done, but yeah, like I said, this is just going to be a fairly brief overview of this engine, mainly because I couldn't find anybody who'd actually sort of recorded any information about doing these before. So I was sort of riding it blind going into the first test run of this engine with these sort of carbs and things. Cool, thank you very much. If you like it, like the video and subscribe, and see you in the future. Cheers.